Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone. My name is Can Kantarcı, and I'm the Communications Manager at the Columbia Global Centers Istanbul. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our sixth event of our Quality Journalism series, organized in partnership with the International Press Institute. Columbia Global Centers Istanbul is a part of a network of 9 global centers of Columbia University in New York. The centers aim to educate and inspire through research, dialogue, and action, with the objective of connecting the local with the global, creating opportunities for shared learning, deepening the nature of global dialogue. Columbia Global Centers Istanbul serves as a hub for Columbia programs and initiatives relevant to Turkey and the region. The center aims to contribute to the academic and research environment of Turkey across a variety of fields. The centers also allows members of the Columbia community to increase their knowledge and explore academic opportunities within Turkey. Founded by editors from around the world at Columbia University in 1950, the International Press Institute is a global network of editors, media executives, and leading journalists who share a common dedication to quality and independent journalism. IPI promotes the conditions that allow journalism to fulfill its public function, the most important of which is the media's ability to operate free from interference and without fear of retaliation. IPI defends media freedom and the free flow of news wherever they are threatened. Today, in partnership with the International Press Institute, we'll be listening to a panel about combating disinformation. And we have 3 guests joining us who will be sharing their expertise on legal reforms regarding disinformation, fact-checking, and journalism. Our first guest is Gülsin Harman, who will also be moderating the event. Gülsin is an Istanbul-based journalist who frequently contributes to the New York Times and BBC Monitoring. She was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University in 2020. Alexis Wichowski is a public servant, teacher, and writer who has worked in government, technology, and media for over 20 years. She's been teaching at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs for over a decade. And finally, Gülin Çavuş is the co-founder and head of strategy at TEİT, a Turkish fact-checking organization. She's responsible for TEİT's strategic planning, social impact projects, and aligning the team and projects with the organization's targets. If you would like to listen to the simultaneous translation in Turkish, please go to the interpretation icon at the bottom right corner of the screen and select the German option. Finally, I would like to thank our translators today, Tungur Savran and Seray Okan, and our colleagues at the International Press Institute. I hope you will enjoy the conversation. And without further ado, I'm giving the floor to Gülsin Harman, who will be moderating the panel. Thank you.
Many thanks, Can Bey, and welcome to everyone. As Can Bey said, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning around the world. And here we are to discuss disinformation and many aspects related to disinformation. Unfortunately, this is a subject that is evergreen and with multifaceted issues surrounding the topic. And myself, Alexis, and Gülin, we will do our best to discuss this topic in various subsets. And first, I would like to start with Alexis by asking her a very broad question, in a sense that how technology contributes or counters the disinformation. For example, Arab uprisings 10 years ago, we have witnessed that how social media and platform companies were hailed as a tool to provide public space to further advance the democracy and the public discussion. Yet today we have much more, a maximalist view about social media's evilness regarding to this domain. And hence I would like to ask Alexis that within your ample experience over the years, what did you observe about the role of technology in the area of disinformation?
Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion. I'm glad that it was noted earlier that I have been working in this area for about 20 years, which means that my earliest experience in technology was hand coding websites to basically say, hello world. So in the beginning, and this is important because technology itself, as you mentioned, its role in spreading democracy or information that is helpful to democracy or spreading information that is harmful to it has changed over time. And I just want to make 2 points about where we came from. Because technology at its root, it's kind of a glorified plumbing system. Its point is to get something from point A to point B. If it were plumbing, it would be water, maybe, For technology, it's information, it's an email, it's a video, a phone call. There's the goal of technologists for decades and decades has just been to make that process efficient, fast, and reliable. Whatever went through those tubes, like water through a system of pipes in a house, they had no interest in what that was. And it's only in the last few decades that we have started to see that technology companies actually do need to take an interest in the content of what's going through the tubes and the pipes and the systems. And it's not entirely clear, really, how we're going to do that. The first thing I wanted to say was just there's a long history of the people designing these systems just for efficiency, not caring about the content. And as the United States, I think many of you know, there's been a long tradition of legal protections that say just that technology companies are not responsible for the content on their websites. That hasn't worked out very well. So we're now starting to see them play a bigger role. And the question is, should they? And if not them, then who? I personally feel that it's not a matter of saying, okay, Mark Zuckerberg, you are going to be in charge of saying this information is quote unquote good information and this is bad. I also don't necessarily think, and I work in government, that would be wise to leave that entirely up to government as well. What I think we need to do is optimize the technology structures themselves to enable everyone who's participating in the dialogues online to have a role in saying, this is harmful, this is helpful. So this question of what kind of role the technology companies play or citizens play or governments play has yet to really be answered. But I do believe that the traditional approach to technology, which is just efficiency of getting info from point A to point B, we are past that. And we need to shift our thinking into saying what kind of structural systems and tools can be built into them to allow users to contribute to keeping harmful, hateful, and false information from spreading online.
Thank you so much, Alexis. This is really interesting that to describe where we have arrived, starting with the how to spread information, and now the question is that whether we arrive to an age of regulation. And apparently we need some regulation, but who will handle the regulation and who are the stakeholders and how to find a common ground about an online dialogue would be a topic to discuss for years to come. And then I will, for the second question, I will go to Gülin. Since Gülin is the co-founder of Turkey's pioneering fact-checking, online fact-checking organization, Teyit, Gülin, you've been using the glorified plumbing system that Alexis was describing, and you are using the very same tools, the technological and the social media tools that were widely used to spread misinformation, but your organization employs the exact same tools to counter misinformation and to counter harm. How does it work for Teyit in a sense that using the very same tools to counter misinformation?
Yeah, as Alexis says, we have to find a solution to tackle with all this information disorder problem, because it's not as Alexis says, this information is not just going to A to B now, and so we have to deal with. So fact-checking organizations in the world actually kind of a way, kind of a tool to show how we can tackle with misinformation and disinformation, and how accurate information actually is helpful for our information diet. Maybe we can just simply say this. So for Teyit and many other fact-checking organizations, of course, we have to spread the truth, spread the accurate information in same ways, because actually, according to research, this is the best way to reach people in the same way, in the same methods when they interpret to disinformation, because the format, the media is really important when consuming the information. So, but basically, basic methods for Teyit to deal with misinformation, actually spreading the truth, the most creative, clear, and simple way. You have to be very concrete and very simple way to deal with it. And we are providing a clear explanation why the information is false and what is the true instead of this misinformation and disinformation. We have to put the to accuracy and the truth, not just saying this is false. So you have to repeat the truth again and again, like the false information. So we never use the clickbait or any fuzzy words or fuzzy explanations or else when we using these tools. So we are trying to give whole context and accuracy according to the, of course, social media platforms, because, for example, in Twitter, we have to have very limited conversation when we just trying to reach our audiences. But the important thing is, again, giving the truth, giving the accurate information at the beginning. So sources like the debunking handbook help us use effectively the accurate information and navigate our narrative of truth. So it's really important to put truth instead of false information. But of course, repeated exposure to mis and disinformation also cause people towards believing these claims. So, and fact-checking works. We definitely know that fact-checking works, and many research just proved this. Even if a correction seems effective, people sometimes still rely on the mis or disinformation in different contexts. So they still believe some the misinformative part of the maybe the mindset of or the thinking habits. So we encouraging people to critically evaluate information when they read anything in internet. So we have in our website, we have dedicated category called Thepedia. We publish guides to tackle with misinformation, translating research on disinformation, showing how people can use digital tools to find evidence-based information on internet, actually. We are trying to empower users with different tools and techniques. So digital media literacy is a huge importance while doing fact-checking, because as I said before, fact-checking is just one way to reach accurate information or create critical thinking society or understanding. So giving people enough information or enough tools to be part of the solution is the most important thing for Tate. So for this, we are empowering the different groups in society, like students, teachers, journalists, with trainings or co-creating understanding or co-creating methods. So at the end, we are trying to strengthen our doubt muscles, what we call. So if we just strengthen this muscle, like other muscles in our bodies, so we can just be ready to false information or other disinformative problems on the internet. So we can create actually a healthier digital space together, because on ourselves as a fact-checking organization is not very efficient, isn't actually lead us to the solution itself.
Thank you, Gülün. As you said, that the digital literacy and critical thinking are absolutely a must in the current world that we live in, yet they take a lot of time, right? And this is not something, a critical thinking in a society, it is not absolutely something that you could reach overnight or just any program, or nobody has the magic formula. Any news organization or any university has the magic formula in that sense. As a journalist also, like what you say, it really resonates with me, since journalism by definition, it is the profession of repeating the truth, and repeating the truth for public interest, to serve the public. Yet in the last few decades, we've seen that around the world, and in Turkey, very sadly, we experienced this phenomenon very strongly, the distrust in journalism. And that would be my biggest concern for the future of Turkish journalism in terms of quality and establishing a deep bond with its readers, with its audiences, to going ahead to ensure that the public that journalists are supposed to serve are the same, as much as interested as the journalists. And I would like to ask at that point, Gülün, that since in journalism too, we very much discuss how to handle disinformation, especially following ex-US President Trump's wall-to-wall coverage during the election campaign and how it ended up affecting the American public opinion. So there are some reports and there are some academic research talking about the oxygen of amplification. And there are some also opinions within the journalistic community saying that it's better not to touch it, just treat disinformation like a toxic waste, just let it perish in another corner, other than digging and trying to persuading people that disinformation is false. Some people and more, actually, I hear more pro voices in that direction saying that the disinformation should be completely out of the picture. So in that sense, how Teit uses its editorial choices. Do you have, I know that you have a harm scale, and what are the editorial choices when Teit, and especially in a country like Turkey, where polarization and the political discussion really is under the polarized political discussion, it makes things very quite impossible to persuade people on the sharing the other political opinions. So for Teit, how the editorial choices, how do you prioritize and how do you choose what disinformation to handle?
The first thing is we check whether the claim is verifiable. So we can just check is it based on data, or we can just check with concrete evidences. So Teit doesn't investigate topics that are not checkable in the first space. So predictions and claims about the future and assumptions about any events or any person that are expected to occur are not investigatable for us. So we choose among the verifiable claims according to 3 criteria: virality, importance, and urgency. So according to the importance and the virality, it's just in regular times, and urgency criteria is just in times of crisis. The first thing is the content has a certain number of interactions on social media. As you said, if you shouldn't give an oxygen to not very viral disinformation on social media. The virality criteria may differ according to the social media platforms, of course. For example, 1 million view is something different on TikTok, but is different on Facebook, of course. So the first thing is virality. Importance is second criteria for us. Content that can have an impact on individuals, communities, different groups, systems, right, or democracy, like elections. We have an elections. I think many people know. So if it's important, it can be second criteria to investigate. So virality can be a second criteria. So Teit is a social impact oriented organizations, and public interest as a real issue for us. So misinformation about refugees or climate change can be prioritized according to this. So harm scale of disinformation and misinformation should be taken into account when we just looking at the suspicious contents or any other topics in news on social media. Or according to the harmfulness of disinformation, information could feed polarization among the society or increase hate speech, for example. So we have to be careful about what is the public interest. And also, sometimes in an editorial choice, we sometimes choose not publishing anything to according to the public interest sometimes. So it's really important. So the third one is urgency, a content which occurs during the moment of crisis, where emotional breakdowns are experiences, and which is can just create some social anger, fear, or such a things. Sometimes if it's not viral, we have to fact check such a things in crisis times because of the urgency criteria. This crisis times also make more polarized atmosphere, like countries like Turkey. So if the claims meet these criteria, and then we started to research and investigate, and then of course check the evidences, and then decided to publish. So these are the basic prioritization methods for us.
Thank you so much. In what you said, that I think that there's an aspect that tends to get overlooked in disinformation, that how it relates strongly to emotions and identities. Some scholars in the field would like to compare them to even to the cults. The idea of, like, when I refer to emotions and identities online, so it's very hard to counter once a piece of disinformation become the backbone of an online community, which assumes that lie to be, they're very at the very core of their identity even. And I'm sure that Alexis has something to say about this with her expertise in government. Certainly, there's nothing new about politicians lying, manipulating, and gaslighting. But recently, around the world, especially in the US, we have seen very unprecedented cases of politicians taking the mantle of disinformation to very well define their own politics. And also, state-sponsored disinformation is also widely spread. And for you, Alexis, in your expertise, what would you say that the disinformation, the propaganda, which was always a defining aspect of the politics, what has changed?
I just want to say also, there was about 1,000 things that you guys all talked about that I thought, I have more to say about that. This is all fascinating to me. And before I get to your point, I just want to address one thing that you both had mentioned about, which is not feeding, not giving oxygen to the misinformation or disinformation, but still acknowledging it. And then, Gulsen, you mentioned that the role of emotion. For instance, if some opposite political group claims something, even if it's true, it's very likely that people from the other political group won't even consider it, simply because of the emotional sort of barrier to say, well, everything they say is crazy, I'm not going to pay attention to it. So this is this polarization thing that you mentioned. And then this question about why is it so much worse now? It's not like it's new. It's not disinformation, falsehoods, gaslighting, propaganda. These are not new phenomena. One of the things that's different about it, though, is with the technological capabilities that we have now, we can be extremely selective about what we expose ourselves to. So for instance, a Facebook group, we can become part of that community, and the information that's shared there, we're maybe more likely to believe than what's shared elsewhere. And this is one of the things that's become weaponized over recent years. So there was a study that was done in 2019 it was published in the MIT Technology Review, looking just at that, at Facebook groups. The two largest communities was focused on, one was for African Americans on Facebook, another one was for Christian Americans. They had at least 2 million followers each. And they did a study of how many of the posts, the most popular posts of the year 2019 were actually created by the people who said that they were who they said they were, or how many were created by state-sponsored actors attributed to Russia. For the African American group, there were 11 Facebook posts, the most popular of the year, that were all coming from Russian troll farms. And for the Christian American group, all 15 of the top 15 posts came from Russian troll farms. Now, one of the reasons that I bring this study, is that if you believe that the identity of the person who's sharing the information with you is your people, is someone that is like you, who is part of your community, even if it sounds a little bit strange or unusual, the likelihood to believe that is much higher. So this is, imagine, for journalists and for fact checkers, another really huge challenge to overcome is that some people, it's not about the facts, it's about where it's coming from. So I can say birds aren't real, which was an actual online hoax to point out this precise problem a few years ago, which is crazy. Birds are real. But if enough people say something crazy who you identify with and you trust, it has the ability to conquer actual facts. And we've seen this also with the vaccine misinformation in the United States. So this is just one last example about the state-sponsored misinformation and disinformation campaigns. Measles, the disease, measles, had been essentially wiped out in the United States for decades. There had been a lot of small groups, even before the internet, saying maybe vaccines aren't safe, maybe we won't vaccinate our children. But there was a targeted misinformation campaign, again, state-sponsored from Russia, to spread this false information, to say that vaccines were harmful to children. And we had a measles outbreak in the United States that brought the case numbers back up to where they were in the 50s. So there are real world implications to these state-sponsored attacks. And one of the greatest challenges, I imagine, for Gülin and other journalists is it's not just an assault on a particular group of people or a particular concept, for instance, to get people to not have vaccines or to not trust people outside of their group. It's to not trust reality itself. It puts this question of what is real. The fact that it's even a question makes it very difficult for even facts to combat. And this goes back to Gülsin, your point about emotions. If facts and reality aren't enough to convince people, what will be?
Yeah, that's such a good point. I have my own experience as a journalist and as a daughter with how this information coming from a very trusted source may affect and may have really concrete life implications. In late 2000 and early 2021, I developed a newsletter aimed for senior citizens of Turkey who was facing a very harsh lockdown measures under the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the reasons that I picked this project, I witnessed how my mother was highly susceptible to any kind of disinformation about the pandemic, about the vaccination, when it was coming from her lifelong, very trusted high school, university girls' WhatsApp groups. And there were so many instances that I remember talking to my mother, telling her that, actually, maybe she's listening right now, and telling her that, Mom, there is no way on earth that you would believe this. You are better than this. You know that this is very much false. And then she would reply to me, but this is my friend who sent this. You know her. She's auntie, blah, blah, and she wouldn't lie. And so this aspect of emotion, and especially coming from the very trusted friends, and that's why that Gülin also would maybe expand on this a bit. That's why that closed message groups like WhatsApp or Facebook groups are the most, how to say, hard to catch, yet the places where the misinformation becomes much more abundant. And also maybe a good segue to the legal reforms when we discuss the source. And since in Turkey, we have a draft bill on the parliament floor, which will have, in case that it is turned into law as it is, which will have very serious implications on journalists and on any information producing community in Turkey, defining the source of the information as a very, a very ambivalent definition. And Gülin has been working on the issue. And what would you like to say, Gülin, about what should I expect from the draft bill on Turkish Parliament about disinformation?
Yeah, maybe first I can start with this is not only the Turkey just discussing such a laws or disinformation regulations. So the number of the bills and proposals on disinformation has increased since 2015 all around the world. And we know that most governments use these laws and legislative actions as a tool to oppress the opposition and the media. in a period when news and information gathering process on social media platforms become unhealthy and uncontrolled flows, of course affect people's lives, and sometimes it affects elections, like in US, in other countries, and of course it's increased hate speech. So it looked like, yeah, we need a regulation on social media, and like Alexis says, we cannot say that Mark Zuckerberg do something. So it's in theory, of course, we may think that such regulations are necessary, and only in this way governments can increase the deterrence of spreading false information on social media or the media. But in practice, governments, not act like this. So in Turkish case, the disinformation law bill has started to be discussed in the parliament of Turkey on July 2020. There were many reactions against it because of the 3-year jail sentences. So it's a really, I don't know, don't be surprised when someone just saying on Twitter and talking about how forest fire starts and how governments can not do anything or not to do anything. So people can be jailed because of saying such a things on social media. So if the proposals submitted by the government and the Nationalist Movement Party in Grand National Assembly, a new crime will be added in the Turkish penal code as like public disseminates false information regarding internal and external security. The security thing is the most using terminology on such a laws. So it's one of the problem is in cases where these kind of informations actually couldn't have a solution with the layered structure of the mis and disinformation, because how will decision makers evaluate those disinformation who's or the people who spread false information? It seems that the person's intentions will be determined by the courts and punishment will be given according to the law. So the problem is we couldn't see any clearly explanation about what is fake news, what is false information in this law. The problem is if you actually decided to not explain this definition on the law, on the bill, so you can just say anything or call anything as a false information. The problem is it's can be create censorship against media, against people, and actually why people choose share information on closed networks. Actually, it's just because of this, because people not just feel secure on social media when they think about this, they can just be charged, I don't know, just seen as a terrorist somehow. So we should just understand the problem of the bill and just demand and saying that the law or regulations is not the only solution to fight against disinformation, as we are trying to do critical digital literacy programs or empowering people, empowering internet users is the most effective way. And many research show this. And when we look at the countries like Finland, the countries choose digital literacy and using this way, tackling with disinformation. And also it also gives freedom of speech to people, but still not spreading disinformation when we compare to other countries. So yeah, basically we should be careful about such regulations on disinformation.
Absolutely, and referring back to what you said, just given that it's an ethical conundrum, and actually it's a perfect dilemma in a sense that as long as there's an attempt, a government attempt to muzzle the freedom of speech, people will immigrate, the conversations will immigrate in closed spaces to avoid any persecution. Yet those spaces are the most susceptible environments for the disinformation and misinformation to flourish. And so the good intentions and the bad intentions of government forces here just makes the core of the story. And here, referring to you and going back to you again, Alexis, like Gülin put it so wisely in a way that's saying that the legislative tools are spreading across the world, and most of the time the intentions are highly debatable. Yet if we are in the age of regulation, as we discussed, that and the state is the most powerful regulative forces since the centuries, and what a good, well-intentioned government interference in the disinformation would look like.
So I'm going to say something that is not popular amongst most of my colleagues, especially in government. I don't think that governments should be regulating technology companies for 3 reasons. Number one, regulations take a long time to develop, they take a long time to enact, and then they have to be enforced. Technology moves so fast, and the people who are developing the platforms and the tools and the workarounds, they're just not even at the same. It's like somebody walking a race and somebody sprinting miles ahead. The regulations will never be up to date with what's actually happening with the technological landscape and practices. That's number one. Number two, as you mentioned, governments have the ability to put people in jail, to take away their freedoms for their perceived participation in spreading disinformation or saying things that they don't agree with or don't like. And that's highly problematic because it can be used to suppress people's opinions that are not popular. I don't think that that's a good move for governments to put themselves in to be the arbiters of what's people are allowed to say or not allowed to say. The third thing is I wrote a book a few years ago about technology companies taking on these greater role of acting sort of like countries in all kinds of ways, but one of them was about taking charge of the violent, hateful disinformation, the rise of extremism on their platforms. And I interviewed someone who was a quite senior level official, interesting slip, position at Google, who said, the internet is kind of like a park or our ecosystem. If it's polluted, like if you go to a park and it's full of trash, people don't want to go there anymore. So it's in our economic interests as a tech company to make sure that we're not littered with lies and falsehoods and toxic information. So this was a suggestion from someone inside Google saying, we should be doing more to make sure that we're not permitting hateful speech and disinformation to spread, because we'll lose business basically. So I think there has to be, as cold as this may sound, a kind of economic perspective that we take on this as well, is that if people stopped going to, for instance, Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever platform they're using because it was littered like a park, it just was toxic and unpleasant, those companies would work harder to make sure that this disinformation didn't spread. So I think there's a role to play here for big tech to, even if it's just out of self-interest, do better. They already do a pretty good job of making sure that certain kinds of content don't spread. I think that they could take a much more aggressive role in not putting someone in jail for putting certain kinds of content online, but just removing that content altogether.
Thank you so much, Alexis. And for the audience, we like to remind you again that we have a Q&A session. Please feel to put any of your questions in the Q&A chat box. And We have a question from Günel Ahmedova, former international news agency and radio journalist from Azerbaijan, covering post-First Karabakh war topics, from refugees to war veterans, as well as Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan issues. My question is, how would you describe difference between mass media and mass communication notions?
So I can take a stab at this and just say my first take on it would be that when we talk about the media or mass media, we're talking about journalists, so people who have been trained and have some sort of credentials or experience in reporting what's fact, verifying sources, fact checking, etc. Mass communication, that's what we have now online. Anybody can post something online. It can be an opinion that they say is a fact. It can be an observation that is just theirs and their interpretation. And for anyone consuming the information, they may not make the distinction between what's coming from a journalist who has been trained, who works for a media organization, and somebody who's just a person on the street. So I think that would be one of the distinctions. And this is one of the, my personal opinion is the reasons that we need to do more, countries globally, in every way we can, to protect and elevate the role of journalists who have been trained and who are professionals in this, because we need that kind of integrity and expertise.
Similarly, like journalism also has this very vital and crucial discussions right now, Alexis, in a sense that with the social media and big platforms, everyone now can be a creator, and actually they are creators of information. So journalism does not have the gatekeeper position as it has. So for journalism also, and especially for journalists as a profession, that every time that I talk to colleagues around the world also, the main challenge remains, I mean, of course, in addition to the revenue models and this financial sustainability of independent media, it's a whole other discussion. But for many journalists, the main challenge remains that how to redefine this connection that used to be so well established and well defined and within very clearly cut lines. I mean, before that in Turkey too, like I remember from my childhood in the 90s that the newspapers were having a very wide circulation numbers, the TV channels, their ratings were really high. And there were faces that you would see every day on TV or you would read every day on the newspaper. And those were the sources that you can always turn to have the verified and to have the trustworthy news. And so for in social media, one of the main challenges that it brought to us that anyone can be a creator, as we talk at the very beginning. Yes, it can be hailed, it can be praised as a tool to contribute, as a tool to enhance the public discussion by making society much more pluralistic, where everybody can have a voice. But yet the challenge would remain that when everybody has a voice, what to do with these voices? And again, for the audience, please feel to type up any questions that you have in mind to the speakers and to the related topics. And meanwhile, one thing that we didn't go into detail too much, but the content moderation. And you touched briefly, Alexis, that platform companies should not be heavily-handedly regulated by the governments, but when left to their own devices, what will be the best practices for platform companies?
I would go back to this point earlier about sort of the pollution of their platforms. If I logged into Twitter or Facebook and it was nothing but hate speech or like violent content, I would very quickly say, no, thank you. This is not fun. This is unpleasant. I'm not going to go here anymore. And the social media platform would lose business. So I think part of the question is how to make sure that they create an experience where people are free to express themselves, but not in such a way that is damaging or toxic. But this, I actually wanted to go back to your point about journalists and trust, and how, in many ways, it's a wonderful thing that there are so many voices now who can be part of the conversation, the public discourse, who did not have that kind of opportunity prior to social media. But I also feel that in some ways we need to have another kind of protection for people who are professional journalists, so that we know who they are, and who has kind of taken that oath, for instance, to say, I will, report truthful, factual information. The verified blue check mark on Twitter is not enough. I think that I don't know what it would look like, but there are, for instance, in many industries, you can't repair some sort of tech equipment if you're not part of a trade association, if you don't have that certification. And I would think that because journalists play such an incredibly important role in making sure that we have access to verifiable, credible information that is fact-checked, that has been sourced, I think that there needs to be some more discussion about journalists as a protected class of some sort.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a whole discussion among journalists, the community, like how to protect the profession as it is, and how to ensure those very ties that you have described also. And Firdevs Robinson has a question. She asks, in order to create the kind of customer pressure on tech companies to keep their park clean, as Alexis Wachowski rightly underlined, social media literacy skills must be developed among users. How sufficient our education systems are making this possible, and what else can be done? And I'm sure that Gülin, you have a lot to answer in that regard. Like, what are you doing to provide outside of state institutions those kind of critical thinking, fostering trainings and education?
Yeah, actually, we are just trying to use different approach for different target groups, because it's very active change according to the teachers. For example, it's changed with the students and the journalists. Of course, it's, for example, the journalists, we do more maybe the focus on how we can reach sources with the digital tools while we are investigating anything online. But with the teachers, we last year we finished a project, and we work with the Teachers Network. So a group of teachers actually, after our presentations, trainings, workshops, they create their own methods to use in their own classrooms. So it's really powerful because they create their own methods to use and to transfer their knowledge to students in a different level of education. So it's, of course, if we just use this method with the, how can I say, the more organized with the state power. So it's create, of course, more impact, but still it's really impactful, because after our project and after teachers transfer their skills in the classrooms and transfer their skills to the other teachers, it spread to different schools and different classrooms. And it really actually just shown, seen in the, for example, exam sheets. Students learn something, even in a really short period of time, like 6 months. And they have really an idea about how they can search something on Google with a very easy way, and can reach evidence-based information. So actually creating impact is not that hard. And so sometimes we are thinking that critical digital literacy, of course, is something really huge, and is need more systematic approach. I totally agree with this, and we need a system level change, but still we can change with the very minor impacts on a impactful group of people or communities. So I think that we should just analyze the different target groups and understand the needs of these groups, and finding different methods to just understand the problem and create solution together. So the basic thing is the critical digital literacy things is basically working together and understanding the problem affects all of us in a different way. So yeah, maybe I can answer.
Thank you so much, Gülin. It's really encouraging to hear that the customized training or community-focused education even create a minor impact immediately that can be observed in a short term. Because as you said, that we tend to get maximalist in our discussion, like how to how to have generations that prioritize critical thinking, and sometimes the work starts, on a very small and scalable level, that the scale and the group really defines it. And there's a question from Kathleen McMahon. She asks, economic incentives for tech companies may be directly in opposition to interests of the state. How can we balance or evaluate what is good for society if it isn't also good for the bottom lines of this type of companies, when such companies do not incur the social or external costs that may be caused by their profit-oriented goals and approaches? Thank you for this fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, no, my first thought about that is, yeah, the business models of the existing social media companies they have no incentive really economically to do anything about this problem, because the more people click, the more people watch, the more hours they spend going down the rabbit hole of misinformation and disinformation, the better for them. So it needs to be a different business model approach. And it's not to say that that's not possible. It's selling ads against clicks is one approach to make money for tech companies. But if anything, growing up in the capitalist Wild West of the United States, I can say is that people can make money all kinds of ways. They're very creative when it comes to finding ways to make money. And I feel confident that if it was more difficult, I'm not for regulations about content, government policing of content, but regulations about how tech companies, for instance, can monetize the users that engaging in their platforms. That could be effective, because right now there's no incentive to try to do anything different. So if there was a way that it was somehow a little bit more painful for the tech companies to just let people click away at any terrible information they could find, maybe that would be a way to encourage people to think creatively. What are other business models we can come up with that don't feed into these horrible outcomes?
And also, like, thinking about your answer, Alexis, certainly I do not intend to whitewash tech companies at all, but it really reminded me the research done by Sinan Aral at MIT in 2018, like how false news travels faster than true stories. As a story is as, engaging and out of the real world sense of weirdness, and humans, like, as we discussed, like, human emotions also play a very important role in that one. And as you said, that maybe it will be very wise to keep always in perspective that technology is just a glorified plumbing system that you mentioned, and the information are coming from humans, and the users are very humans who are always chasing for what's new and what is the bright next shiny object.
So I just want to interject one point to that, which is something that Gülin had mentioned earlier about information. I think you mentioned about information diet and the kind of health. We are currently, all of us, kind of information gluttons. We just gorge ourselves on information. And this comes back to this point that you just mentioned, Gulsen, about technology in itself is just tubes and plumbing. We're humans. We're not evolved so far that we can process 100 times more information than we could yesterday, or 1,000 times more information than we could a month ago. So I think that that's another piece of this, is not just digital literacy, but a digital kind of diet system of restraining a sheer amount of information that we consume. Because perhaps if we had limits on self-imposed limits on the kind of the amount of food that we took in, information that we took in, we could be more discerning and careful about assessing, is this real? Is this credible? Where is this coming from? But right now we're all just, I think, gorged on junk information.
I just want to add something. And sometimes we are just, of course, I understand the monopolization of the tech companies. I totally understand. But also, we all the time just looking at this technological improvements with different ways. Like we can also look at the other solutions like Wikipedia. So technology is not one group of people's hand. Now, yes, but we cannot say that it's never changed. So it can be changed, but actually it's really important when we are talking about the ethics behind these technological companies or algorithms behind this technology. So it's really important to just understand the existing circumstances and what other alternatives. So it's not the one way. So we can just diversify the options all the time. And there are many different group of communities trying to show people we can actually use different tools, different social media platforms to just maybe just put some gaps between the whole this monopolization. So it's really important to showing, also saying people it's not the only way we have to go. So it's a very long maybe discussions, but it's just my hope, I can say.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gülün, and thank you so much to both of you, because it's been one of the most, let's say, hopeful conversations that I ever had about disinformation. As you would imagine, the mood in the room always, whenever we talk about disinformation, is quite moody and gloomy. And if you would like to say a few words for closing remarks, please, you are welcome, Gülün and Alexis, if you do want to add up anything else.
No, thank you. Thank you for this conversation.
I also will thank you. And I also will say that for all of my studies and very sober and kind of frightening moments of realizing what technology has done to our world, I am ultimately optimistic, because I think that we can figure this out and that we have to.